Thank you guys as well. My name's Liz Warren. I'm from a company called SE2. I'm not going to do a big introduction because I've got 17 minutes before tea, and also there was wine and beer. And if I know one thing about the retrofit industry, it's that it likes wine and beer, so I will be as quick as I possibly can. It's always interesting when you prepare a presentation for something like this, and you know that thematically we're all talking about communities and energy. And often when things are programmed in, you start with the big and then get to the small. What we've done today, actually, interestingly, is start with the 1, go up to the 6. Am I going to talk about the big 60,000? Are we really aiming for that? What is the big 60,000? This is a phrase from Greg Barker. Remember him? About the ambition for community energy in this country. We've heard already from Rajat, I'm going to use the same stat as him about the 5,000. And the ambition was to try and create, instead of the big 6, the big 60,000 of all these amazing community energy groups doing fantastic projects. We're starting on a journey, so let's say that much. And I'll jump in. I want to get a bit philosophical. I'm going to do big things and philosophical and talk about things like words. Because we talk about community energy and kind of blithely say community energy. What do we mean? I thought, well, okay, what does community mean and what does energy mean? Thank you, Google, for providing me with definitions. Community, a group of people living in the same place, particular characteristic in common. We tend to think, when community energy, about the people in the same place. We tend to be talking about physical and geographic communities rather than this sort of community of interest or community of characteristic. Energy. It's funny when you look up the definition of energy and what you get. Strength and vitality. But also power, derived from the blah, 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 blah. Power was a very interesting word as well. It's also audience participation theme hour, because we're at the after lunch slot. So it's show of hands time, because words are words, but pictures are more fun. Who thinks that looks like community energy? Yeah, okay. What about this one? Yeah, we're doing well. How about this one, which is somebody getting some nice advice about energy? Losing a few, maybe. How about this one, which is kind of collective switching, collective purchasing of energy? Losing a few more. Anybody? You guys, you two need to say that. And this is the thing, when we think about community energy, actually a lot of the time we're thinking about community renewables. And what is that? What is that message that we're sending? And what does that mean for the, if you like, the energy efficiency part of the retrofit market? I'll come back to that. This is the state of the nation. I haven't fragmented Scotland off into its own sort of separate universe, thankfully, because it's really good for the stats to have it. The DEC Community Energy Strategy, as we heard, says there are 5,000 community energy groups or projects since 2008. Some of those are ongoing, but a lot of them were very specific projects set up in response to funding streams. So there's not 5,000 right now. It's not very clear how many there are right now, but there's not 5,000 right now. Disproportionate number have been in rural areas, 41% in rural areas. Disproportionate numbers also in Scotland, yay Scotland, and in the southwest of England, where you've got 19% in Scotland, 15% in the southwest. So you go, well, okay, that's all the renewable stuff. Actually, yeah, most of that is the renewable stuff. About 50% of those projects, actually, we have this perception that it's the renewables that are driving community energy projects. About 50% of them, about half, have been renewables only. Some have had a combination of renewables and energy efficiency. Some have been energy efficiency only. The energy efficiency only projects tend to be in the more deprived areas, whereas the renewable projects are more evenly split across the country. So that's just an interesting thing to note. Who's involved in community energy projects? I did a survey in autumn last year of community energy groups across the country, asking, you know, how did your group come about? Who are you? What are the challenges? What are the information gaps that you found along the way? Which bits of a project were easy to do and which bits were more difficult? And that was to inform some thinking for DEC and Community Energy England about information and support to the sector going forward. it was suggested, these are suggestions rather than findings, if you like, that perhaps there's a demographic split between different types of community energy group. There is a set of groups, if you like, community energy projects that are run by retired or semi-retired professionals, often people who've had a connection to the energy industry or the buildings industry in some way, and often these are setting up renewable energy projects, so community-owned wind, community PV. Often in the south. These are quotes from the survey, by the way. This is not just me. This is what real people said. So you've got people who are kind of finding themselves moving from work into leisure and golf and just wanting something in between, perhaps, to do something for the local community. There's also a set, I should look at our young activists, perhaps, of younger activists. And these are sort of seen as people potentially in more urban environments, the north, but people who actually had the real motivation and were not setting up to do an individual project, but were thinking more about setting up a more sustainable business or a co-op or a charitable organisation that would carry on for a number of years and be their job. So we had project-oriented people and kind of long-term community co-op type people. When asked why people were involved, fortunately, about half, their prime reason for being involved was environmental or sustainability. And I think that reflects in what we've heard earlier. And a big, big challenge for all groups was time. People come and go, bringing their skills, it's all voluntary. So if the volunteer happens to be off doing something else for a while or have other commitments, things stop. We're mostly retired people. Working people are keen to get involved but just don't have the time. So that was a huge, huge factor all the way through projects, and it's often a thing that the early enthusiasm wanes when people realise just how much time and complexity there is in the process. So what is it like? I should have asked you guys this. You can just do this. There is this huge wave of enthusiasm at the moment, which comes from frustration, actually. I think you said frustration earlier on. I didn't realise as I was putting this together that both my quotes started with people being fed up. So people are fed up. But people are excited, they're like-minded, it's about their neighbourhood, about their community, it's about doing something together to improve a locality. There's a lot of motivation and a lot of excitement. Mixed view on skills and whether communities and the organisations coming together and the groups coming together had the right mix of skills. Some people thought, yep, we've got it, we know what we're doing, we can pretty much sort it out ourselves. We've been lucky enough to have that. Or actually, people don't have the knowledge that they need. Now, I'm quite happy with some of these people, although I question, and the research sort of questioned some of the self-judgments of saying, oh yes, we're fine. But even if half the projects, half the groups are lacking in some sort of skills, then that suggests challenges for the sector going forward, or potential blockages along the way. The biggest problem was time. I know how they feel. Limited time to develop an organisation, develop a project. And the division of labour is different from a business. Because we're all in it together. Everybody's in it together. So everybody's doing a little bit. And actually, traditional kind of management responsibilities don't really exist in a lot of community energy projects. It's much more of a kind of committee, sort of shared project and shared division of work rather than kind of hierarchical. Some big numbers, because we haven't had any numbers for a minute. 87% of community energy groups who responded to our survey said they felt they didn't have enough legal knowledge or legal skills to do the things that were required to set up an entity or set up a project. 87%. That's huge. And one of the things we're now talking to DEC and other organisations about is actually how we deal with that, what sort of guidance, if guidance is enough, what sort of training, what sort of resources can help people overcome that barrier. Because the legal side is incredibly complicated. And as we saw this morning from the solid wall insulation side of things, the legal side is what's going to come back and bite the industry. and bite these community energy groups if they get it wrong. So understanding the legal implications and legal structures is really, really important. 79% of community energy groups said that they didn't have the financial management skills to run their projects. Discuss. 90%, however, this is a nice one, 90% actually felt very confident about their community engagement and project management skills. So that's reassuring. Because these are things, and actually, if you like, this is some part of the core of it. These are skills that you can buy in, but they do tend to be quite expensive skills to buy in, and we'll come on to that. So what do groups struggle with? There are some things that make it more difficult to set up a community energy group, community energy project. Funding for the beginning bit. You've had an idea, you think that you can put PV and a heat pump on the community centre. Brilliant. You've got loads of people who are excited by this concept. However, you need to get a whole load of surveys done. You need to get some legal advice. You need to get some financial advice. You need to work out the business model. You need to all learn about this stuff and how it works. That takes time and it takes some money. Luckily, the Rural Community Energy Fund and the Urban Community Energy Fund, RCEF and UCEF, I have been advised on the pronunciation, are now providing, from DEC, is now providing seed funding for these sorts of activities. So that's hopefully going to unblock some of the projects that reached a certain point but couldn't go further because they didn't have £4,000 or £5,000 to pay for the surveyor, the lawyer, the technical person, the designer, etc. I've mentioned legal issues. Negotiations, when you're a community energy project, you need to talk to the grid, you need to talk to the DNO, you need to talk to a big energy company or a big product supplier. You're the little guy. That negotiation is not in your favour. So that's something that groups struggle to do. Often groups that work with an organisation like Pure Leapfrog, where they could get access to pro bono financial or legal advice, were able to deal with this much more effectively because they had effectively a big city lawyer with a big city badge who could come in and talk corporate with the big guys. Physical grid capacity, like the national grid. Actually engaging local communities. For all that the groups felt confident in their skills, they also found it very difficult, to go beyond the core group of activists and originators and the motivated pioneers into something bigger, into something that reaches out to the mainstream in a community. It's very, very difficult. And grappling with policy changes, we find it difficult. We as an industry, we do this for a living. We find it difficult, frustrating, etc., when fits change. When, schemes come, schemes go, when the solid wall bit of eco is cut and this bit of eco is that, and then there's no eco anyway. We find it difficult. Community energy groups are run by people in their spare time who don't necessarily have a professional background in energy. How on earth do you think they feel? So that's now. What's coming next? I have a little anxiety about whether community energy projects are focused on the right thing. I think some of the incentives that have been put in place, and I think this is not just about community energy, but some of the incentives driven from government are encouraging us to take up technologies when we should be doing other things first. I was trained in this sector by Peter Rickaby, and I know all about fabric first. And I'm getting incentives for PV, and I'm getting incentives for renewable heat, but, I'm actually probably lucky that I'm not doing fabric first, given what we heard this morning. But is the focus on the right thing? Is that our fault? Is there something that we as an industry, in the energy efficiency industry, can be doing to help community energy groups and community groups understand the hierarchy and the logical sequencing of things? Discuss. Should we be going to government saying the incentives are wrong? Should we be going to groups and saying, okay, use those incentives to get an income stream to then do other projects? It's that sort of conversation that we need to have. Can we get to the scale that is needed to achieve our carbon reduction, anyone? Carbon? Our carbon reduction targets. We've not talked about carbon much today. We've talked a lot about fuel poverty. Both are very, very important issues. Both are very different issues. We have to have scale in achieving either of them and approaches for achieving both. Here you go. Are community energy groups sustainable? This one is a huge concern. A lot of groups are set up to do one project. And then those semi-retired people go, right, I've done that. I've left my legacy. I now want to just go and sit down and, I don't know, read books, be idle. Who's going to take that project on? Who's going to take that group on? What's the next wave of that group? Is there another hill that needs a wind turbine? Is there another building that needs some PV panels? Succession planning is a real concern at the moment, I think, for a lot of policymakers in this space, so that we can maintain the momentum of the 5,000, and we're not just losing a few hundred of them each year and replacing them with a few hundred different ones. What happens when a scheme goes wrong? Let's not dwell there. Oh, policy uncertainty and never enough money, because those are just givens. I thought I'd end on a happy note with a bit of a challenge to the industry as to what we can do to help community energy projects and community energy groups really make the most of the opportunity, make the most of that enthusiasm and go on the journey. This is just my personal thing. It's helping communities to understand, to have those energy conversations that Rajat was talking about, to really understand what the priorities should be for that local area and for that local community. That idea of co-development and co-production of a project, you're going to get a lot greater enthusiasm and motivation and buy-in from the community if they've been part of the conversation, if the conversation is helped along the way in a way that's going to benefit more people. The challenge of scale, well, let's get involved. Let's talk to DEC. Let's talk to Community Energy England. Let's talk to others and say, what can we do to help? Between us in this room and in this building, we've got experience of working in tens of thousands of homes, hundreds of thousands of homes potentially. We can bring that experience to help the sector by engaging in conversations with the people who have got an overview of the sector. So the sort of membership association, if you like, and the policy regulators. Long-term sustainability of those schemes, well, okay, that's where the supply chain can really start to put a little bit of enthusiasm in there and say, well, okay, we've helped you with one, and Russell's smiling because this is what he's doing. We've helped you with one project. How can we help you with the next thing? What's the next thing? I apologise for my always being asking. I don't know what was going on there. Quality and standards underneath the typo. If we don't get the quality right, we don't get the standards right, we're going to get those legal issues coming back round. I don't need to tell this room that, but I'm just saying it to make sure it's on the list. And policy changes are going to happen. Policy changes are going to happen in about 8 days' time. Policy changes are inevitable, although my constant plea is like, let's have a 5-year framework of something certain. It's not going to happen. We're going to get the swings and roundabouts and stops and starts that we always had. How can we help those community energy groups and projects be flexible in the face of policy change? Or get the message to DEC of the impact of policy change on these fledgling projects that they're really trying to encourage? Money. You see, there is some money. There's £25 million of it. It's quite nice. Rural Community Energy Fund and Urban Community Energy Fund, have a look at them. Have a look at the criteria. All of our companies are based somewhere. Find your local community energy group. Say, hello, I can help you. Perhaps we can be the technical advisory or the commercial advisory that you've been looking for to really take your project forward. And perhaps we can dedicate some of our time to helping put together a really compelling bid into the funds. The other side of money, we tend to talk a lot about domestic retrofit. Houses don't exist in isolation, houses exist in communities. And the community buildings that are around and the commercial buildings, charitable buildings that are around also offer scope for measures. And I think it's time we can challenge ourselves a little bit to think, well, what's the community-wide business case for doing something? It probably used to be called mixed use, didn't it? What's the mixed use business case for retrofit? If I bring a school into a project, what does that do to the economics? So those are the sorts of things that we can be thinking about if we as an industry are going to really help community energy revolution to happen. Thank you very much. Yes, I declare 2.